Why do you still feel empty after getting everything you thought you wanted? You mapped the mountain, you climbed it, you even smiled at the top. But something followed you up there, something quiet and persistent, a kind of hollowness that doesn't scream, but hums like a low note behind every accomplishment. You told yourself it would be different this time, this promotion, this partner, this next phase. It would finally settle the unrest in your chest. But it didn't. Not for long. And now you're left with the question no one teaches you how to ask. What if the life you've built is full of things, but devoid of being? It's a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that visits even when you're not alone, even when you're admired, even when you're surrounded by the very things you once longed for. And no one sees it. No one suspects that behind the confident posture, behind the precise calendar and the structured days, you've quietly lost contact with something vital. Not because you failed, but because in some strange way you succeeded. You became who you were supposed to become. You wore the mask well. You outperformed your past, exceeded the expectations of others, and turned yourself into a competent, dependable, respectable man. But in the pursuit of that image, something intimate was buried. But what if this wasn't burnout at all? What if this was a kind of awakening, not violently, not all at once? It faded slowly, replaced by systems, by routines, by the machinery of self-improvement. You didn't lose yourself in disaster. You lost yourself in discipline, and the tragedy is, it worked. You figured out how to control your world, how to eliminate unnecessary emotion, how to stay focused, how to earn, how to impress. You built the scaffolding of a strong life. But now that scaffolding feels like a cage. You wake up with tasks already orbiting your head. You eat to fuel, not to savor. You listen to people with just enough attention to reply, but not enough to actually hear. The day flows by. You did everything right, and yet you feel nothing, or worse, you feel a flicker of something and immediately suppress it. Emotion, when it surfaces, feels like interference. When was the last time you felt something and didn't immediately push it down, explain it away, or get back to work? So you return to control, to order, to action, because that's the only thing you trust now. You trust doing, you trust building, you trust refining, but being feels dangerous. It's too open, too soft, too full of the things you don't quite know how to hold. Grief, joy, awe, longing. So you stay in motion. You sign up for another course. You push another workout. You upgrade your setup, optimize your time, read another book on mastery. And somewhere underneath it all, a small voice keeps repeating, I don't know how to be here. I know how to perform. I know how to execute, but I don't know how to just be. No one blames you. You were trained for this, not explicitly, but culturally, systemically. You were raised to win, not to feel, to provide, not to pause, to conquer the mountain, not to notice the wind on your face as you climb. But the wind was the point, and deep down, you know that. The view was never the destination. It was just the excuse to wake something in you. And that something has been calling, not with urgency, not with panic, but with an ache, a longing for wholeness, a hunger to feel alive in your own life, not just effective, not just respected, but present. That's the turning point, not a breakdown, not a dramatic fall from grace, just a quiet recognition that somewhere along the way, you learned to be everything for everyone, except real with yourself. And now the question won't leave you alone. What if I've succeeded at building a life that the world applauds? But it's a life I don't actually feel? That's not failure, that's awakening. It doesn't begin with greed. It doesn't begin with vanity. It begins with fear. Fear of being nothing, of fading into the background, of not being needed. It's a quiet fear, one that rarely speaks its name, but shapes everything. From a young age, you were handed this invisible instruction. Become someone. Be significant. Be seen. Be better. So you learned, maybe not from a father, but from the world itself. You learned that value doesn't come from presence. It comes from production. You are not loved because you are you. You are loved because you are useful, competent, composed. You are loved because you're not a burden. And so, slowly, you built a life around being needed, around performing, around never letting your edges show. There was praise for your focus, recognition for your resilience. People called you grounded, disciplined, mature. And maybe you were. But underneath the structure, something softer was being pushed down. Something human, something unmeasured. Your hunger for wonder, your longing to be held without needing to earn it. The part of you that still remembers how to be without a goal. That part went quiet, because the world rewarded the mask, the role, the one who could carry everything and still smile. So you doubled down, you filled your calendar, you made plans, you read books on stoicism, on systems, on efficiency. You learned how to handle emotions like tasks, label them, process them, discard them. Feelings became problems to solve. You sat at dinner but couldn't taste your food. You nodded through conversations without remembering a word. You responded to messages with your face lit by a screen, but never really showed up. But something inside you didn't want to be solved. It wanted to be felt. And when it couldn't be, it hardened. It became silence, a subtle emptiness, one that grew behind your accomplishments. Like a shadow stretching across a room you no longer enter. You keep performing, you keep achieving, but there's this growing sense that none of it lands. Like drinking salt water, the more you consume, the thirstier you become. Be honest, how many times have you upgraded your life hoping it would finally quiet the noise? The more you build, the more haunted you feel by what hasn't been built inside. It's not burnout, not exactly. Burnout has a beginning and an end. This is something else, something deeper, a kind of existential drift, as if you've done everything right but still can't feel at home in your own life. Because somewhere along the way, the pursuit became the purpose, motion became the drug, stillness became unbearable. Every free moment is filled, every silence is plugged. The idea of doing nothing, not because you're lazy, but because you're already whole, feels almost dangerous. And the scariest part? No one around you seems to notice. You're successful, you're respected, you're functioning. No one suspects that the man who looks so put together is quietly unraveling in places he can't name. Because the unraveling isn't loud. It doesn't come with collapse. It comes with detachment. With performing joy instead of feeling it, with giving love instead of receiving it, with building a life so well you forget how to live inside it. This is the lie, that more will save you, that the next version of yourself will be the one who finally feels peace, that if you just get leaner, smarter, more productive, more attractive, more respected, then the noise inside will finally quiet down. But it never does. Not for long. Because the noise isn't asking for more, it's asking for truth. And the truth is hard to face. That much of what you've built wasn't born from desire. It was born from fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of sitting in the rawness of your own humanity without a script to perform. That's why you chase. That's why you plan. That's why you can't stop, not because you're broken, but because you were never taught another way to exist. Until now. Because the ache you're feeling, the quiet hollowness beneath the surface of your achievement, it's not the beginning of failure. It's the beginning of waking up. And when you begin to wake up, the world starts to look different. Sharper, stranger, quieter, like a set you've performed on for years. Only now you're starting to realize you never wrote the script, and you're not sure you want to keep playing this part anymore. But someone saw this fracture long before you did. That's the fracture. the space between the man you became to survive and the man who's finally ready to live. And this is where we meet Fromm, not as a philosopher in a textbook, but as someone who saw this fracture long before we did. Someone who understood that the real war is not between failure and success, but between having and being. What if the real problem isn't what you're chasing, but how you're relating to everything you chase? That's the shift, the crack in the mirror. Because if you go deep enough into the ache, if you stay with it, really stay, it begins to whisper a different kind of question. Not, why am I not satisfied yet? But what if satisfaction was never supposed to come from having anything at all? This is where Erich Fromm enters, not as an academic, but as a witness. A man who saw that modern life wasn't just distracting, it was disfiguring. That we were training ourselves generation after generation to mistake possession for presence. And in doing so, we were losing our connection to life itself. Fromm called it the split between two modes of existence, the having mode and the being mode. The having mode is everything you've been taught to strive for. It's accumulation, it's ownership, it's control, it's treating experience as a product, treating love as something to acquire, treating knowledge as something to store away like inventory, treating time as something to manage, conquer, optimize. Even your own identity becomes an object, something to refine, to display, to market. You don't just feel something, you track it, you label it, you turn it into content or insight. You don't just rest, you recover. You don't just relate, you strategize connection. Weigh vulnerability, calculate value. It's subtle, and it's everywhere. The having mode turns everything, including yourself, into a thing. And when your life becomes a series of things to collect, you stop experiencing them. You might be with someone, but you're not with them. You might be in a moment, but already capturing it for later. You might be successful, but that success becomes a wall between you and the rawness of being human. You've been in rooms full of admiration and still felt like a ghost. The irony is brutal. The more you possess, the less you feel. Because the having mode is built on fear. Fear of impermanence, fear of loss, fear that if you don't control something, it will disappear, or worse, reveal you as not enough. So you grip, you secure, you plan, you scale. And the deeper part of you, the part that only knows how to be, not to perform, starts to disappear under all the strategy. Fromm warned us, if I am what I have, and if what I have is lost, who then am I? And that's the question no one wants to face, because everything you've built, everything you've crafted, your habits, your image, your competence, it can be taken, it can fade, it can collapse. And if that's all you are, what's left? This is why the emptiness feels so threatening. It's not just a feeling, it's a signal. It's your soul quietly telling you that the scaffolding of the having mode can't hold your humanity. It was never meant to, because there's another way of being that doesn't require constant validation, constant building, constant measurement. Fromm called it simply the being mode. And the being mode is everything the having mode can never touch. You don't own in the being mode. You relate. You don't dominate time. You dwell in it. You don't manipulate love. You surrender to it. Being is not efficient. It's not marketable. It won't make you feel superior, but it will make you feel real, alive, in your body, in your breath, in your sorrow and your joy, unfiltered, unedited, unoptimized. It's the mode of presence, the strange, sacred aliveness of holding someone's gaze without trying to win them, the humbling silence of feeling awe without explaining it, the tear you let fall not because it's part of the process, but because something inside you remembered how to soften. Being is not a lifestyle. It's not a rebrand of masculinity. It is the return to your original self, before the metrics, before the masks. And it's terrifying, Because in the being mode, you lose control. You can't schedule transformation. You can't predict what will emerge once you stop performing. You can only choose to stop, to stay, to feel. And in doing so, you begin to realize you were never starving for more things. You were starving for more you. And now it's time to remember how to feed yourself. You didn't set out to betray yourself. You set out to protect yourself. And the line between the two was thinner than you realized. It started with simple choices, subtle, small adjustments. You felt something rise up inside you and you tucked it away. You had an opinion, but it felt too risky. You had a need, but it wasn't the right time. You had a moment of softness and you masked it with strength. Not because you were pretending, but because you were surviving. This is how it happens. Not with a dramatic break, but with 100 minor edits to your inner life. Until one day, you can't remember the last time you felt anything unfiltered. You're still living, still performing, still achieving, but from a distance. A distance from your own experience. A distance from others. A distance from the part of you that doesn't care about being useful. It just wants to be real. But real started to feel unsafe. Because real is unguarded. Real is messy. Real can be rejected. And rejection, you've had enough of that. So you did what smart men do. You learned how to survive without needing closeness. You traded vulnerability for control, not consciously, but consistently. You became careful with your honesty, strategic with your presence. You started giving just enough of yourself to maintain connection, but never so much that it could threaten your image. You became the man everyone trusts, but no one knows. Are you even letting anyone see you anymore, or just the version you've curated to survive? You show up, you provide, you guide. But in the quiet moments, those rare, unclaimed hours, you can feel the truth. You've become an expert at managing life, but a stranger to your own inner world. And the strangest part, you can talk about this. You can name the pattern. You can even analyze it, explain it, intellectualize the entire cycle. But none of that gets you any closer to actually feeling again. Because survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying away from the parts of yourself that felt too much, too soon. The grief you never processed, the softness that was mocked, the desires that didn't fit the mold. So you buried them. Not to forget them, but to function. You buried your sensitivity because there was no room for it in a world that rewards stoicism. You buried your wonder because wonder has no place in 5-year plans. You buried your loneliness because you thought needing people made you weak. There were nights you sat beside someone you loved and still felt like you were alone. And now, when stillness finds you, it's not peace that rises, it's grief. Grief for how long you've been gone from yourself. Because you remember moments when your heart beat louder than your plans. You remember laughing without calculating. You remember the unguarded boy you used to be before performance became your refuge. He's still in there, not lost, just waiting for the man you've become to stop surviving long enough to finally listen. And maybe that's what this emptiness has been all along. Not a threat, but an invitation. A call to stop protecting yourself from a life you haven't fully lived. To come back to the parts you buried, not to be overwhelmed, but to be reclaimed. Because the truth is this, you don't need another tool. You don't need another upgrade. You don't need a system for feeling. You need permission to stop managing your humanity like a liability and start honoring it like a lifeline. This is not a breakdown. It's a reunion, not with an ideal version of you, but with the version that was never allowed to stay. And yes, it will feel unfamiliar, even terrifying, because presence has no script. It doesn't protect your ego. It doesn't guarantee outcomes. But it does something the having mode never could. It brings you home. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no grand awakening, no sudden revelation that lifts the weight from your chest. and leaves you radiant with purpose. That's another fantasy, another performance. The truth is gentler, stranger. It comes in waves, in fragments, in pauses so small you almost miss them. It begins when you stop looking away, not from the world, but from yourself. That moment in the mirror when your own eyes start to feel unfamiliar. That moment when silence creeps in and you resist the urge to fill it. That moment when you feel grief rising, not from a wound, but from memory. And you don't suppress it this time. You let it come. And in doing so, you feel something ancient begin to stir. Not motivation, not intensity, something slower, truer, still, presence. Not the curated kind, not the performative kind, but the raw, full-bodied presence that doesn't demand anything of you. And in that space, you remember. You remember that being isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about entering it, without armor, without expectation, without the need to master every moment. Because the truth is, you were never meant to master your life. You were meant to inhabit it, to let it shape you, to let it move through you, to let it humble you. Fromm understood this. He knew the having mode would always seduce us with its promises of security, status, control. But he also knew it would never feed the soul. Because the soul doesn't want control. It wants contact, connection, depth, meaning. In the being mode, everything becomes alive again, not because anything outside of you changed, but because you are no longer measuring, hoarding, manipulating your experience. You are letting it land, the sound of the wind, the weight of someone's gaze, the tremble in your voice when you say what you actually feel instead of what's expected. You start to realize that life was never asking you to be impressive. It was asking you to be here, that your value was never meant to be proven, it was meant to be lived. And slowly, the metrics that once ruled your world begin to loosen their grip. You stop asking, is this efficient? And start asking, is this true? You stop optimizing for results and start listening for resonance. You stop seeking validation and start cultivating intimacy with your own breath, with the people in front of you, with the moment as it is. Not because you've become passive, but because you've remembered what power actually is. It's not domination, it's not control, it's not perfection, it's presence. The kind of presence that doesn't flinch when things fall apart. The kind of presence that can hold joy without needing to capture it. The kind of presence that can stay open, even in grief, even in uncertainty, even when nothing makes sense. And maybe this is what you've been moving toward all along. Not a life of peak performance, but a life of depth, of slowness, of sacred imperfection. You're still strong, you're still disciplined, you're still capable of building beautiful things. But now, those things are expressions, not escape routes. Now, your strength isn't a mask, it's a channel. Your discipline isn't suppression, it's devotion. Your clarity isn't strategy, it's honesty. You're no longer building a life to protect yourself. You're building a life you can finally feel. You're building a life to feel yourself. And that changes everything, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the subtle shift of your gaze, in the way you breathe slower, in the way you stop interrupting your emotions, in the way you begin to trust that the man you are beneath the performance is not just enough. He is needed, not by everyone, not to fix the world, but to fully show up in it, not because he has something to prove, but because he finally knows how to be. You don't need a new system. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to optimize your way into wholeness. You just need to stop leaving. Stop leaving the moment. Stop leaving your body. Stop leaving the man beneath the mask. He's not broken. He's just been buried beneath years of striving, of proving, of becoming. But he's still there, quiet, intact, waiting for you to remember that being alive was never something to earn. You don't need to have more to be more. You need to be here, in this breath, in this body, in this truth. What you have can be taken. What you are, if you choose to reclaim it, cannot. So take the risk. Not the kind that wins applause. The kind that brings you home. Not because you've reached the end, but because for the first time, you're ready to begin.